And he put forth the form of an hand, and took me by a lock of mine head. And the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and the heaven, and brought me in the visions of God to Jerusalem, to the door of the inner gate that looketh toward the north, where was the seat of the image of jealousy, which provoketh to jealousy. And behold, the glory of God of Israel was there, according to the vision that I saw in the plain. Then said he unto me, Son of man, lift up thine eyes now the way toward the north. So I lifted up mine eyes the way toward the north, and behold, northward at the gate of the altar, this image of jealousy in the entry. He said furthermore unto me, Son of man, seest thou what they do, even the great abominations that the house of Israel committeth here, that I should go far off from my sanctuary? But turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations. And he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, behold, a hole in the wall. Then said he unto me, Son of man, dig now in the wall. And when I had digged in the wall, behold, a door. And he said unto me, Go in, and behold the wicked abominations that they do here.
Which passages of Scripture should guide our public policy? Should we go with Leviticus, which suggests slavery is okay? Or we could go with Deuteronomy, which suggests stoning your child if he strays from the faith? Or should we just stick to the Sermon on the Mount, a passage that is so radical that it's doubtful that our own Defense Department would survive its application? Folks haven't been reading the Bible.
State of affairs. It is certainly no secret that our country and the world today has fallen into a very sad state. While we all no doubt recognize this fact, I believe that the church today, just like Ezekiel prior to chapter 8, does not really understand just how bad things truly are. Down the rabbit hole. And he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, behold, a hole in the wall. Then said he unto me, Son of man, dig now in the wall. And when I had digged in the wall, behold, a door. This thought brings us to the topic of conspiracy theories, a term that has been thrown around quite a bit in recent years. The embracing of such theories began gaining popularity with the JFK assassination, and since that time they have steamrolled to the point that you can find a conspiracy theory on just about any topic you like today. Incidentally, this has led to a ridiculing of conspiracy theorists as a whole, lumping anyone who entertains such ideas into a group of tinfoil hat-wearing nuts. However, the ridicule directed at conspiracy theorists is not completely without warrant either, not because there is no truth in their ideas, but because the ideas have not led them to the truth, the way, and the life. Many people today within the realm of conspiracy theorists have stumbled into and gained a glimpse of the spiritual warfare that is taking place without the proper foundation to understand. They do not have the eyes to see and ears to hear what they are seeing and hearing. The result quite often leads such people into a militia-type mindset towards governments, corporations, individuals, and the world in general. While on the other hand, the church has the proper foundation, ears to hear and eyes to see. Yet we don't really want to look at these things. Ephesians 5:11, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. For it is a shame even to speak of those things which are done of them in secret. But all things that are reproved are made manifest by the light. For whatsoever doth make manifest is light. Wherefore he saith, Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. Just like Ezekiel, sometimes God has to drag us by a lock of our head to give us the needed knowledge so that we are equipped to handle the job. And just as Paul told us, though some of these topics are even shameful to speak of, they must be made known by the light. Exploring and exposing these topics without being spiritually led to do so could be potentially dangerous. Thus Paul goes on to tell us to do such things in a diligent manner, circumspectly. See then that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Wherefore be ye not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. It is my belief that if the church today would begin to see the broader picture of spiritual warfare a bit more clearly, it would motivate us with a sense of urgency like no other to spread the gospel more effectively. Additionally, it will better prepare us for what's to come. If you have the proper foundation, Christ within you, then uncovering these conspiracies will not lead you to a militia mindset, but rather a deeper, more loving mindset for those who are so badly deceived. The long game. So just what kind of conspiracies are we alluding to? As we have pointed out already, there are many different branches of conspiracy theories. However, what we want to highlight is that each one of these is all a part of one concerted conspiracy. Revelations 12:7. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought, and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. It is the conspiracy of the pride of Satan revealed in Isaiah 14, which resulted in the war of Revelation 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. When Satan was cast down, he knew he was defeated, but that has not stopped him from raging on, seeking whom he may devour, weakening the nations, and deceiving the whole world. We know that Satan's long game really began right there in the garden. However, throughout history, there have been many shifts in his strategy. At the cross, Satan's plans were spoiled heavily. For the next few hundred years, all he could do was try to slaughter every Christian that popped up. Throughout this period of time, from Calvary to around 350 AD, it seemed with every Christian he killed, 10 more would replace them. It was a wildfire that he could not handle. Eventually, though, he would shift his efforts, and rather than try to kill the church, he would infiltrate it. Through the establishment of the Roman Catholic Church, after the Emperor Constantine came to power, Satan found a way in. Over the next 1,000 years, he would have much success in distorting doctrine and concealing the written word from the masses. Alas, with the Reformation period beginning around 1500 AD, these efforts too would be spoiled for Satan. It is from this time period until today that we want to zero in on and reprove the manner in which Satan has been working ever since. Just as the church was unaware of what was being done to them when the papacy rose to power prior to the Reformation, so too many have fallen asleep as to what Satan has been doing since that time.
Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Sleepest thou? Couldst not thou watch 1 hour?
We will be looking at many of the conspiratorial branches that Satan has established throughout this period, and what it all might be leading up to. Not long after the Reformation begun, Satan was already fast at work, getting his troops together. There is deception among us. Titus 1:10. For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, The Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true. Wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. Unto the pure all things are pure, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure, but even their mind and conscience is defiled. They profess that they know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient, and unto every good work reprobate. As we move through this presentation, there is a great deal of information that we will look into. However, at the end of the day, I cannot show you anything. This must be spiritually discerned. 1 Corinthians 2:7. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory, which none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man, the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. For what man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of man which is in him? Even so the things of God knoweth no man, but the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know the things that are freely given to us of God, which things also we speak, not in the world's words which man's wisdom teacheth, but which the Holy Ghost teacheth, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. As you begin to see just how dark and ugly this spiritual warfare truly is, try not to lose sight of the fact that many of the people involved, while some are even outwardly worshiping Satan and promoting Luciferianism, they are not necessarily intending to plot against the masses. Quite often these people and organizations are so deceived that they feel they are the only ones with the secret knowledge to know what is good for humanity. What they do not realize is that the one whom they are worshiping is really just out to devour them. Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Additionally, as our presentation progresses, we will highlight some of the dangers that the church has become very susceptible to, which are associated with some of these conspiracies, particularly pertaining to how we view the last days economy, insurance, healthcare, safety, and security, as these are the key areas where I feel Satan has the greatest chance of pulling the church into his deceptions today. And keep in mind that the end result is not just so that we can know something about what some elite group of people are doing, but rather to deepen our burden as a witness and a light in an ever-darkening world. We've begun to highlight the idea that Satan's plan and strategy for enslaving and ultimately devouring humanity has taken on a number of changes or shifts throughout history as the spiritual war continues to play out. Oftentimes, when we look at what Satan is doing in the world, we narrow our focus to just our lifetime or our surroundings. While there are many nuances within Satan's plan unfolding further each and every day of our lives, I think we would do good at times to take a step back and look at the broader scope. In doing so, we might begin to see those everyday nuances in a whole new way. We can see the forest and the trees. The most recent major shift in Satan's plan, and perhaps the final shift, I would suggest occurred in the late 1400s and early 1500s, with the final collapse of the Byzantine Empire of Rome in 1453 and the ensuing establishment of the Church of England in 1534. Two events which provided the kindling and fuel for the Reformation, which Martin Luther would light a match to in 1517 when he nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the All Saints Church in Wittenberg on October 31st. While these are the 2 or 3 major events which would frame and shape the manner in which the spiritual war has played out since that time, there was a whirlwind of events taking place throughout this period, which would also plug a number of spokes into the wheel. So let's dig in to see what in the world is going on. One of those first spokes, which would go on to play a key role, was the invention of the printing press around 1450 in Germany by Johannes Gutenberg. One of the first major works of Johannes was the production of the Latin Vulgate Bible in 1454. It is said that he produced between 160 and 180 runs of the Bible in that year alone. Today there remains 49 surviving first edition copies, which are the most valued books in existence. Prior to this time, very few people had access to a full canon consisting of all 66 books of the Bible. Typically, the books of the Bible were copied and compiled individually prior to the press. There were some complete editions prior to the press, but access was extremely limited. With this in mind, we can certainly understand how easy it was to twist doctrine and theology leading up to that period. It was very likely one of Gutenberg's Vulgate Bibles in which Luther would go on to study from, as Luther himself was a prominent priest within the Roman Catholic Church. His studies would lead him to draw up his 95 Theses against the Church, resulting in his excommunication and placing him as a key figure of the Reformation. The role of the printing press, however, would go much deeper than just Bible theology. While God has certainly used the press for much good, Satan has been hard at work as well. The press has and still does play a key role in shaping the minds and attitude of the culture. Additionally, it was the first major step in bringing us back to a new one world order akin to the Tower of Babel and framing the future Mystery Babylon. The press began to shrink the barriers of language exponentially. The influences of the printing press will underline many of the topics we will look at going forward. Another key event which took place during this period is one in which I'm sure you are all familiar with and learned early in life. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We are often taught that Columbus was the first European to discover America. Many people today have come to know and realize that this was not the case. It is well documented that Leif Erikson and the Vikings sailed from Europe to North America nearly 500 years before Columbus. But even beyond that, I would suggest that many people likely made the voyage across the Atlantic as far back as 70 AD, after the destruction of Jerusalem, which set off a migration bomb in the Middle East. While it is true that most of those migrants simply followed land routes northwest into what is now known as France, Spain, and England, I can't help but think there must have been some adventurous sailors who literally threw caution to the wind, sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar, and into the unknown. While we do not have any written evidence of this idea, Archaeological finds have uncovered supposed 1st and 2nd century Roman artifacts in North America. Further, it is said that Simon the Zealot was martyred in South Africa near the Cape of Good Hope. While that is not across the Atlantic, it does support a 1st century ocean voyage of several thousand miles in the earliest efforts to fulfill the Great Commission. We do know as well that ships and sailors were plenty capable of making long extended trips across the open sea during that time, as Luke tells us in Acts 27. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' span. And entering into a ship of Armadatheum, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Artachascus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul, and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycra. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us therein. And when we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Sandus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete, over against Salome. And we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. With this in mind, let's turn our thoughts back to Columbus and some of the pop culture ideas surrounding his voyage. Ideas that he just sorta accidentally bumped into America on his way to China and India, or that he had set out to prove he wouldn't fall off the horizon. These ideas really highlight not the ignorance of men in Columbus's time, but instead the ignorance of people today. As Acts 27:20 points out to us, navigation, particularly in the open sea, was accomplished via the sun, moon, and stars. All hope was lost in verse 20 because of the extended cloudy weather, which prevented them from knowing what direction to sail. Anyone with just a basic understanding of astronomy, which any experienced sailor had, could spend one night studying the stars, by locating Polaris, the North Star, then tracking the sun or moon that day in accordance with the season, how far it was tracking from the solstice or equinox. You can make a simple calculation to determine the circumference required to sail around the world, and the direction required to do so. In fact, this was common, undeniable, undisputed knowledge. It is well documented at the time of Columbus that the circumference at the equator was about 25,000 miles. Additionally, Plato and Aristophanes had supported this idea from as far back as 300 BC. So just what was Columbus really doing? First, we need to understand the culture climate in Spain and England during and prior to this time. The Crusades occurred beginning around 1095 AD and ended historically, and not so coincidentally, in 1492. The central focus was an effort by the Church, or Europe, Italy, France, Spain, England, etc., to reclaim the Holy Lands of the Middle East, which had been under Muslim control since the time of Muhammad, around 650 AD. Ultimately, the Crusades were a failure. The result of this Muslim-controlled hostile region had now made it nearly impossible for trade routes along the Silk Road to continue functioning from India and China across the Middle East to Spain and England. If they could not remedy this problem, then the economy, and ultimately their power, would continue to weaken, while the Muslim world would continue to benefit, and sooner or later overtake them as well. The Northwest Passage. As a solution, Columbus proposed to the King and Queen of Spain that he could establish a Northwest Passage to India across the Atlantic, meaning north of the equator headed west. The intentions were not only to establish the trade route, but to also Christianize India and ally with them to surround and take back the Muslim world. Columbus had calculated that the passage would be between 15 to 18,000 miles if he could locate a passage north of the equator near the summer solstice. His calculations were correct, and he knew exactly where he was going. The fact that he proposed a northwest passage tells us that sailors already knew South America was in the way, and the only way to India would be around the bottom of Cape Horn, a journey which would be far greater than even the 25,000 miles around the equator. Further, they also already knew that North America was in the way due to the Viking voyages, among no doubt others as well. Additionally, the passage that Columbus chooses also tells us that he already had foreknowledge of the Gulf of Mexico, and that he was confident, wrongly so, that he could find a passage through it into the Pacific and/or Indian Ocean. No doubt he assumed there must be a tiny passage somewhere, just as the Strait of Gibraltar, which he was so familiar with, leads a narrower opening from the Mediterranean into the Atlantic. Most people are not aware that Columbus actually led 4 separate voyages across the Atlantic, with many ships. We are taught of the first trip with the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, and a crew of around 100 men. However, just 1 year later, his second voyage would contain an entire fleet of ships and 1,200 men. All 4 voyages sailed straight into the Caribbean, San Salvador, Haiti, Cuba, etc. His fourth voyage would take him all the way to Panama. He was so close to the Pacific and that ever-elusive Northwest Passage that he could almost jump across. This fact also highlights that Columbus knew exactly where he was and what he was trying to accomplish. He could have taken one look at the night sky, as he surely did, and known that he was nowhere near the known trade routes to India, but well on his way. If only he could see that Panama Canal today, no doubt it would bring a smile to his face. A new plan, a new world. As the Spanish expeditions began establishing and proclaiming as their own these Caribbean islands, they quickly realized the riches and spools available to them left no need to establish that trade route. Here's an excerpt from one of Columbus's letters. I discovered many islands inhabited by numerous people. I took possession of all of them for our most fortunate king by making public proclamation and unfurling his standard, no one making any resistance. Columbus's letter also provides observations of the native people's culture and lack of weapons, noting that they are destitute of arms, which are entirely unknown to them, and for which they are not adapted, not on account of any bodily deformity, for they are well made, but because they are timid and full of terror. Columbus goes on to declare that the land could easily be conquered by Spain, and that the natives might become Christians and inclined to love our king and queen and princes and all the people of Spain. Throughout the next century, Spain would send hundreds of ships across the Atlantic, including the voyages of Ponce de Leon, who sailed with Columbus, and would go on to aid in establishing some of the first European colonies on the continental land of America, in the areas of St. Augustine and Melbourne Beach, Florida, in 1513 through 1521. Although he is perhaps better known for rumors that he had located a fountain of youth in the golden-laced crystal waters of Florida. Further, Spain sent at least 5 ships with Ferdinand Magellan in 1519, who would complete the trade route around the bottom of South America and on to China and India, the first documented circumnavigation. These Spanish expeditions began mining a tremendous amount of gold out of the New World and began establishing colonies on both the east and west coast of Mexico. But before we get too far into that, let's look at another early Spanish-sponsored sailor by the name of Amerigo Vespucci, who began making voyages around 1499 to 1501, just as Columbus was winding down. He would conduct extensive mapping work, both of the land and sky, and lay to rest any notion that Columbus had sailed across to India, as some were still rumoring. After exploring the Central and South Americas, Amerigo recorded in one of his letters that the land presents a climate milder and more delightful than in any other region known to man. Here's an excerpt from his letter reporting on his voyages and findings in 1501, taken from a pamphlet distributed throughout Europe in 1504. Bear with me as we read through this, as I believe this letter begins to set the scene for the deception which Satan is building. And that in a word I may briefly narrate all, you must know that of the 67 days of our sailing, we had 44 of constant rain, thunder, and lightning, so dark that never did we see sun by day or fair sky by night. By reason of this, such fear invaded us that we soon abandoned almost all hope of life. But during these tempests of sea and sky, so numerous and so violent, the Most High was pleased to display before us a continent, new lands, and an unknown world. At sight of these things we were filled with as much joy as anyone can imagine usually falls to the lot of those who have gained refuge from varied calamity and hostile fortune. It was on the 7th day of August, 1501, that we anchored off the shores of those parts, thanking our God with formal ceremonial and with the celebration of a choral mass. We knew that land to be a continent and not an island, both because it stretches forth in the form of a very long and unbending coast, and because it is replete with infinite inhabitants. For in it we found innumerable tribes and peoples, and species of all manner of wild beasts, which are found in our lands, and many others never seen by us, concerning which it would take long to tell in detail. God's mercy shone upon us much when we landed at that spot, for there had come a shortage of firewood and water, and in a few days we might have ended our lives at sea. To Him be honor, glory, and thanksgiving. Part of this new continent lies in the torrid zone, beyond the equator, toward the Antarctic, for it begins 8 degrees beyond the equator. We sailed along this coast until we passed the Tropic of Capricorn, and found the Antarctic 50 degrees higher than that horizon. We advanced to within 17.5 degrees of the Antarctic Circle. The Antarctic is not figured with a great and a little bare as the Arctic is seen to be, nor is any bright star to be seen near it. We found in those parts such a multitude of people as nobody could enumerate, as we read in the Apocalypse. A race, I say, gentle and amiable. All of both sexes go about naked, covering no part of their bodies, and just as they spring from their mother's wombs, so they go until death. They live 150 years, and rarely fall ill, and if they do fall victims to any disease, they cure themselves with certain roots and herbs. The land in those parts is very fertile and pleasing, abounding in numerous hills and mountains, boundless valleys and mighty rivers, watered by refreshing springs and filled with broad, dense, and well-nigh impenetrable forest, full of every sort of wild animal. Trees grow to immense size without cultivation. Many of these yield fruits delectable to the taste and beneficial to the human body. Some indeed do not, and no fruits there are like those of ours. Innumerable species of herbs and roots grow there too, of which they make bread and excellent food. They have too many seeds altogether, unlike these of ours. They have there no metals of any description except gold, of which those regions have a great plenty, although to be sure we have brought none thence on this our first voyage. This the natives called to our attention, who averred that in the districts remote from the coast there is a great abundance of gold, and by them it is in no respect esteemed or valued. They are rich in pearls, as I wrote you before. If I were to seek to recount in detail what things are there, and to write concerning the numerous species of animals, and the great number of them, it would be a matter all too prolix and vast, and I truly believe that our Pliny, a first-century Roman naval officer and philosopher who perhaps had knowledge of these lands, did not touch upon 1,000th part of the species of parrots and other birds, and the animals too, which exist in those same regions, so diverse as to form and color, because Polycletius, the master of painting, in all its perfection would have fallen short in depicting them. There, all trees are fragrant, and they emit each and all gum, oil, or some sort of sap. If the properties of these were known to us, I doubt not but that they would be sultry to the human body. And surely, if the terrestrial paradise be in any part of this earth, I esteem that it is not far distant from those parts. It is this man to which America gets its namesake, as he literally put his name on the map. But just why did Columbus and Amerigo get the credit for discovering the New World? It just so happens that they both wrote extensively and documented their voyages, and Amerigo even more so. But so what? I would bet that even other sailors, just as Leif Erikson did, and perhaps even those first-century migrants out of Rome, documented their journeys as well. However, guess what happened with Columbus and Amerigo's letters, which was not possible with these earlier sailors? You got it, the printing press. Their discoveries were widely distributed throughout Europe, in various languages. The world was growing and shrinking at the same time. As a side note, the explorers also learned a number of new words from the Caribbean natives, such as barbecue, hurricane, tobacco, and more. Even more intriguing, when the explorers began to share stories with the natives concerning cosmology, such as the Big and Little Bear, the Dippers, stories which were rooted in Roman legend and Greek mythology, stories that are said to have been generated by Nimrod and his wife Semiramis at the Tower of Babel. These native people already knew the same story. While on one hand, the Great Commission was being carried out, on the other, we were stepping ever closer back to Babel. Vain imaginations. In the year 1516, 1 year prior to Martin Luther's igniting of the Reformation, the printing press would once again play a key role, this time in stirring up the imaginations of the masses. Thomas More, who was the Lord High Chancellor of England under King Henry VIII, would write a fictional book. This book is viewed by many as the first bestseller. Fiction in the form of a book was a relatively new idea, but it was not just an intriguing story that More offered, which made his book successful, but the underlying possibilities that this book inspired in the imaginations of its readers. The title of the book? Utopia. The book was written in two parts. First, introducing the reader to everything that is wrong in the world, pointing out religious, political, cultural, and governmental failures. Then, in the second part, introducing the reader to the island of Utopia, a word which More himself made up by combining two Greek words. Eu meaning perfect or new, and topos meaning place or land. Together, the word plants the idea of a new, perfect place. Further, the narrative places Utopia as an island apart from the mainland, in which one must sail it to in order to get there. Surely you can already recognize that while More offered his book up as fiction, when coupled with these real-life Atlantic voyages and the stories brought back by Columbus and Amerigo, no doubt the gears began to tick in the minds of men. I will save you all the details of More's book, but I will say that while many of his ideas are a bit quirky and outlandish, as he was trying to add a bit of humor, no doubt in an effort not to offend the king's court with his book's critical view of the old world, he does offer up a great deal of morality and wholesomeness, as well as some ideas that would later come to fruition in the American culture and government. The life of Thomas More is a very interesting one, as he seemed to be a genuinely good-intended person, very loyal to the king, and also deeply committed to the Catholic Church and the Pope. This at a time when King Henry VIII to whom More was second in command, was growing ever more at odds with the papacy over his desire to divorce his first wife, to which the Pope was entirely opposed to and would not grant him. Henry felt that he had just as much authority as the Pope and would eventually establish that idea, splitting the Church in 1534 to establish the Church of England, with the King as its head. While Henry split from the Catholic Church, he was still very much in line with their doctrines and rejected and despised Martin Luther and his doctrine of grace alone through faith alone, which was the highlight of his 95 Theses, now also being printed and distributed by this time. By 1530, Henry had become very hostile to the Reformers, and he commissioned Thomas More with the job of hunting down and eradicating William Tyndale and his work on translating the New Testament into English, a work that was being aided yet again by the printing press. More's organized efforts would eventually lead to the capture and death of Tyndale. However, More would also suffer a similar fate. Nearly in the same moments that Tyndale was arrested, King Henry would have his close friend and confidant, Thomas More, beheaded. When Henry married his second wife, Anne Boleyn, More would not confirm her oath of succession as the rightful queen, as he, along with the Pope, did not recognize Henry's divorce. However, while the Pope spoke out against the divorce, in More's allegiance to the king, he chose simply to remain silent on the matter. Yet, when he could not morally grant Anne with the status of queen, he left Henry with no choice but to remove him for treason, an act punishable by death. When you study the life of Thomas More, while much of his doctrine was lacking, you might be surprised to find that it appears to me at least that he did have faith in Jesus Christ as his Savior. If that be the case, then the fact that he was also the man largely responsible for hunting down William Tyndale highlights just how wicked this spiritual battle can be, and our need to walk ever so close to Jesus.
In the year of our Lord 1528, I finished my first book, written in the English language, titled Dialogue. This was mainly directed against the heretic Tyndale's writing. In my book, Dialogue, I defended the Church's doctrine and practice of the invocation of saints, pilgrimages, miracles, and so on, and proved that the Catholic Church alone is the infallible interpreter of Holy Scripture. I declared Tyndale's translations of the New Testament to be heretical and untrustworthy, and clearly pointed out the heretical bias for which Tyndale had adopted new renderings of words in his translation. His purpose was to conceal the true meaning of the originals.
After the deaths of Thomas More in 1535 and William Tyndale in 1536, the turmoil in England would reach a fever pitch. While the Reformers still had a tough road ahead, they could begin to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Prior to Luther's teachings, Christianity had become a very hard religion to adhere to. The doctrines of the Catholic Church had made salvation a very difficult objective to achieve. Early in Luther's ministry, before coming to the understanding that Jesus paid it all, Luther would literally beat himself with a whip while offering penance for his sins. Sacraments, indulgences, baptism, and a number of other rites made the path to salvation very difficult. In fact, as Jesus told us, the path they were trying to take was impossible. Matthew 19:25. When his disciples heard it, they were exceedingly amazed, saying, "Who then can be saved?" But Jesus beheld them and said unto them, "With men this is impossible." However, after Luther began to spread his doctrine of grace through faith, coupled with these explorations of new lands, many true Christians began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. They began to rightly understand that they could, Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. King Henry VIII would die about 10 years after Tyndale and more, in 1547. Shortly after, his daughter Mary, from his first marriage, would take the throne. This is the daughter to the wife from whom Henry stirred up so much trouble in getting a divorce.
Mary. Aren't you beautiful? Aren't you the most beautiful girl in the world?
I don't know.
Yes, you are. How do you feel?
Well,
Well? Papa's busy. Roger! Mary! We must wait to be married. Do you think you have the patience?
Mary, my darling daughter. Mi cielo, have you said your prayers?
yes.
You are taking my child from me. My child. You are tearing her from me as if you were tearing her from my womb.
I do as His Majesty commands.
No. You are my enemy.
Your Majesty, I have brought your daughter to say goodbye.
I have come to inform you of the judgments made recently by His Grace the Archbishop of Canterbury. His Majesty's marriage to your mother has been declared null and void. Your mother was never legally Queen of England and must now accept the title of Dowager Princess. Just as you no longer have the right to call yourself Princess, but from now on must be known to all as Lady Mary. At the same time, His Majesty's recent marriage to Queen Anne has been declared legal and valid. Her coronation took place in London this past week.
I know of no Queen of England save my mother. And I will accept no other queen except my mother.
In which case, I have to tell you that you are forbidden to communicate in any way with your mother from this day forward.
Mary did not care for her father, but even more so, she was in direct allegiance with the papacy and made it her goal to bring England back to Roman Catholicism. No doubt you know her by her nickname, Bloody Mary. During her 5-year reign, Mary had over 280 reformers burned at the stake. However, Mary would die from sickness at the age of 42 in the year 1558. As she was childless, the throne would soon go to Mary's half-sister, the daughter to King Henry's second wife, Anne Boleyn. Her name was Elizabeth. Her nickname became the Virgin Queen, as she never married, and she was viewed by many as a pure and wholesome ruler, particularly to the reformers whom she gave her support, but also the commoners who were growing ever tired of the disposition between the church, the government, and the papacy. Elizabeth had a disdain for Mary, her half-sister, but also for her father Henry, who, if you know the full story, had his second wife, Elizabeth's mother Anne, beheaded for adultery, charges that appear to have been trumped up against her. Anne Boleyn was very bold with her voice as queen and her ideas about religion and government. Some would say she was a secret supporter of the reformers.
What do you know of my mother, Anne Boleyn?
I know she was so admired by King Henry that he cast aside his first wife to make her his queen.
Lady Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, was also a Lutheran and a reformer. I suppose it is my duty, therefore, to bring the daughter up in the mother's faith.
I should be proud to help the princess thus honour the memory of her mother.
But she really didn't care to keep her thoughts secret. It was her ideas which spurred Henry on to split from the papacy in the first place. Before their marriage was complete, she introduced a book to Henry around 1528 or 29, written by a bright young man founded in Christian beliefs. The title of the book was The Obedience of a Christian Man and How Christian Rulers Ought to Govern. Henry was quite impressed with the ideas in the book, as it spoke out openly against the manner in which the Pope was ruling, and it gave Henry a theological footing on which to split from the papacy, and even further, take Anne as his wife. However, would you like to guess who the author of this book was? None other than William Tyndale. Of course, at the time Henry was reading this book, he had not quite yet grasped the idea that a reformation not only meant reforming the manner in which the papacy ruled, but also the monarchy. After the honeymoon wore off, and Henry came to see Anne's religious supporting ideas not only dethroned the Pope as the supreme ruler, but also the king, Anne would soon lose her head. Here are her final words spoken to the crowd, moments before her beheading.
Good Christian people, I have come hither to die, for according to the law, and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that, whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the King, and send him long reign over you. For a gentler nor more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle in my cause, I will require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world, and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul.
Anne also wrote a letter to Henry from prison in the final days leading up to her death. I would encourage you to read it sometime as well. So this paints the picture of where Elizabeth was coming from and the influence that her mother's life played in the way she would rule England from 1558 through 1603. During her reign, Elizabeth also began sponsoring sailing explorations and conquering quests to the New World, just as Spain had been doing for the past 60-plus years now. Contrary to popular belief, the Pilgrims were not the first from England to come to America. Just as the stories of Columbus are a bit skewed, so too is the case with England's exploration. Two of the first sailors to whom Elizabeth would sponsor in colonizing the New World were Richard Greenville and Francis Drake. In fact, Drake was the first person to declare sovereignty for England on the American continent in 1579. And you might be very surprised to learn where this land claim took place. It was not Plymouth Rock, Jamestown, or even Roanoke Island. It was on a point known today as Point Reyes. You might still be saying, never heard of it. The location of this point is just north of San Francisco. That's right, California. Francis Drake completed what today is known as the second documented circumnavigation. Although rather than an explorer, Drake and Grenville were warship captains, and on those early English-sponsored voyages, they spent much of their time pirating already established Spanish colonies and ships in the Caribbean and along the east and west coast of Mexico, where the golden cities lay. When Drake returned from his circumnavigation, it is said that he brought the Queen so much golden merchandise that in today's money it would equate to over $11 million. Richard Grenville was among the first to help establish any significant English colonies in America, as he played a key role in the colony of Roanoke in 1585, a colony which would collapse and disappear by 1590. The name Grenville lives on in many cities throughout America today. However, it was Richard Grenville's cousin who would become the first really well-known sailor out of England. His name was Sir Walter Raleigh, and unlike Grenville and Drake, Raleigh had a much greater appetite for exploration than war. In 1584, Queen Elizabeth granted Raleigh a royal charter authorizing him to explore, colonize, and rule any remote, heathen, and barbarous lands and countries and territories not actually possessed of any Christian prince or inhabited by Christian people, in return for 1/5 of all the gold and silver that might be mined there. This charter specified that Raleigh had 7 years in which to establish a settlement, or else lose his right to do so. Raleigh and Elizabeth intended that the venture should provide riches from the New World and a base from which to send raids against the treasure fleets of Spain. Despite this, Raleigh actually did very little to colonize the New World, instead spending most of his time chasing stories of gold along the Spanish routes of South America, and bringing back little in comparison to Drake. However, Raleigh rose to fame due to the fact that just as Columbus and Amerigo, he too was a very good writer, and his stories were dramatic at times. In 1594, he published a book describing stories he had heard of a city of gold in South America, in which he searched for. He greatly exaggerated many of his experiences, and it was his book which led to the legend of El Dorado. During her 45-year reign, Elizabeth certainly left an impact on not only England and America, but also the whole world. She has left a lasting legacy. The state of Virginia bears her nickname today, as well as many cities across the country, which were named in her honor. However, after her death in 1603, King James would take the throne and begin ramping up England's colonizing of the New World, establishing Jamestown in 1607 and the House of Burgesses in 1619, which served as England's governance for the New World. This very same establishment would later take on a new name in 1776 as the Virginia House of Delegates. King James would sponsor hundreds of Atlantic voyages during his reign in an effort to make the New World New England. While James did some good for the cause of the Reformers, particularly sponsoring the work on the KJV Bible, James himself did not particularly support the Reformation in the same way as Elizabeth. King James wrote a book titled The True Law of Free Monarchies and the Royal Gift, in which he argues a theological basis for monarchy. In the True Law, he sets out the divine right of kings, explaining that kings are higher beings than other men for biblical reasons. Now, I don't think I need to say much more for you to understand why those pilgrims had had enough and boarded one of those state-funded ships headed out to colonize the New World. Certainly it would prove to be a big and dangerous undertaking for them, but armed with the revelations of grace alone, through faith alone, and a spirit of adventure, confessing that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth, but now they desire a better country. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. Surely they felt emboldened by the power of God, and now knew that the yoke is easy and the burden is light. They had heard the stories of the New World, the cities of gold, the fountain of youth, the terrestrial paradise, utopia, but most of all, they knew that with God all things are possible. Would they find that city, or was there still more to learn from their theology? Next, we will look at just what Satan had in store for these pilgrims as they headed for the New World.